Hello, everyone. In this episode, we're really diving deep into the medical school and the application process. And I have two very qualified people to talk about this with. Tafsir is in his sixth year of medical school at UCL, and he's also been involved in interviewing candidates who are applying for the school. And Abdurrahman is the founder of Medmentor, a platform supporting students who are applying to the school, as well as a fifth year UCL medical school student. Thank you so much, both of you, for giving me your time and joining me today.
No,
No,
thank you very
thank
much.
you. Thanks for inviting us on.
It's great to have you. So I'm gonna take this episode really in a very story format to start right at the beginning, where there are students who are considering or thinking that medicine is the route for them to go. Let's say year 11, year 12, and then we take it all the way up to where you guys are right now. So first question is, and maybe Abdurrahman, you can kick it off. What are the kind of things that year 12, year 11 students who are just about to get into their A levels should be thinking about to strengthen their application as they go into uni?
Yeah, no, that sounds good. I think I'll take it one step back. I think year 12 you need to be doing two real key things, and the first one is to figure out if medicine's definitely the career for you. Sometimes people might not kind of take that consideration. It's a vocational career, so once you're in it, it's very much laid out. It's like a red carpet. It's laid out in terms of how you can pretty much guarantee you know exactly what you'll be doing every year. So it's something that it's not like a lot of other courses where a lot of your friends at university, they might study something and then go on to do something completely different. It's very much one that obviously there are people who do decide to do other things, but it's one that you need to really think about carefully, because it's a commitment from the time you'll spend studying to the money that you might spend, and so on. So that's the first step, I'd say, is really figuring out whether medicine's the right thing to do. And the best thing to do to figure that out is talk to people, as many people as you can, from medical students to people who've just graduated to those who've become consultants, so the more senior doctors, because everyone will have a different perspective. So yeah, that's the first thing. In terms of year 12, the real key thing is what I like to call collecting evidence. So it's all about collecting experiences, collecting evidence that you will use later on. A lot of the action happens in year 13 when you're applying to medicine, when you're submitting your UCAS, you're doing all these entrance exams. But people shouldn't ignore the importance of the year 12 year, because that's everything that you do in year 12 is what you will need to use in your application, in your interviews, in your personal statement, that I'm sure we'll talk about later on today. So in year 12, it's about collecting both medical and non-medical experience. So the medical experience is about getting work experience in a medical or clinical setting. A lot of people focus quite a lot on hospital work experience, but actually you can do a lot of different things. You can work in a GP, so general practice. You can work in a hospice. You can work in a care home. Anywhere where healthcare is being provided in the community or in hospital is a perfect place to get experience. So that's the medical, and people shouldn't perhaps fixate too much on the amount of time that they do work experience. Sometimes I remember when I was applying, I don't know if Tafsir, you had the same thing, but people would sometimes boast about the number of weeks they got work experience. It doesn't really matter, as long as you reflect and you get a lot out of it, even if it's one day or half a day, it actually can be more than enough for your application. So it's more about quality, I'd say, rather than quantity. And yeah, and lastly, I think the other thing is that obviously nowadays it's very difficult to get work experience because of the coronavirus situation. So a lot of people are panicking. There's a lot of online opportunities that are available that take you through what you might experience in person. But also, actually, a lot of people don't realize that a lot of your other experiences, even working as a part-time job in McDonald's or anything, there's a lot of experiences that you'll have on those jobs that you can actually draw upon in your application. So you can talk about the importance of teamwork and working smoothly and relying on each other's strengths in your interview, even from just something like working in a fast food shop or whatever. You can talk about that and you can draw on it. So it might sound unusual, but actually someone from Imperial, an admission student from Imperial, was telling me that. So something that people should remember is that everything can be relevant.
Yeah, I really like the point you make about, being sure about whether this is the path for you, because it is time, money, even emotionally, a huge commitment to go
Yeah.
down. And unfortunately, sometimes we're often forced down the pathway rather than choosing it. And it's really, and I think we will get into this as we go through the episode. But I'm really glad that you brought this up as an important point. Tafsir, anything to add about kind of the work experience aspect of things? Is there something that you, as you've been considering applicants, see something stand out? Have you actually accepted applicants who have been unable to get medical work experience?
So I think what the most important thing from what Abdul just said was reflection is really key after you have these experiences. So someone could have an amazing experience seeing an operation that done by a neurosurgeon. However, if they haven't taken anything from that they can apply maybe later on as a medical student / as a F1, F2 doctor, then it seems like that experience was more superficial rather than meaningful. And so, number one, that's what we look for in personal statements. And when you do write your personal statement, that's why we say quality over quantity. But at the same time, when it comes to interviews, you can really tell a passionate applicant who has done it for kind of the right reasons. And their stories or their reflections really come out as top trumps. And key to being a medical student and a doctor is that one phrase of reflecting on what you've done and seen. And that starts all the way from year 12 when you're on work experience, maybe in a GP surgery, keeping a reflective diary at the end of each day of what type of patients you saw or what things that you learned that day from a doctor or lay people amongst the staff as well. So yeah, that's why I echo.
Tafsir, I'm going to put you on the spot a bit, but a lot of people get confused, especially in sixth form, about what do you actually mean by reflection? Like, what is it? It's an unusual concept. Can you because it is key, isn't it? And yeah, how would you describe it? It's a hard one to describe.
I think every year now of the last 6 years of med school, I had to do some reflective writing pieces. So even my understanding of reflection has improved. But more than anything, it is. You can show it via an example. So if you've gone to see a patient with the GP and you're just observing what's happening there, I said in my personal statement and then expanded on in the interview that actually I really like the rapport the GP formed with the patient, and the way I saw that was through the communication skills, the listening, and the talking, like, and having an actual discussion about their feelings and what the treatment plan was. And hence that's an example of a reflection. I think it's easier shown like that rather than articulated. How's that sound?
It's the key is just not to describe it. So you say you don't want to just say I saw this amazing surgery, end of story. You want to say about how that surgery might have impacted that person. You want to talk about how you might have felt when you saw something happening. It's going into things a bit deeper. So as you were saying, it's not superficial. Yeah.
And I think just to add the last point to this, and this is kind of like the cherry on top, and the best applicants that I've seen were those that reflected on what they saw in a clinical environment and then were able to link that and like a tertiary level reflection on how they've done it themselves, maybe in a microcosm, let's say in being part of a leadership team in a school or doing a fundraising event by working within a team, whilst seeing that same kind of thing with surgeons in an operating theatre.
That's really interesting. I think there's like this is a sensitivity to not just as you said, having experience to just put down, but more about seeing what's happening, accepting what's happening, also deriving insights, and finally, as Tafsir just said, putting it into your actual, some sort of activity that you perform that really shows the strength of an applicant. So building on that, and you mentioned it, Tafsir, you talk about the personal statement. So let's talk a little bit about that. What is different about a medical school or medicine applicant personal statement, and what makes one shine?
Definitely. So I think the personal statement, a medical personal statement, is completely different to any of your other friends who are applying for other courses, whether that be Oxbridge or like whichever course they're doing. And the reason being is because of what Abdul Rahman mentioned, is that evidence has to be shown and also reflected on. So combining our 2 points, and that means that whatever work experiences you've done, you need to kind of, rather than putting it in a chronological order in paragraphs or just listing them out, you need to kind of tell a story and have a few key learning points in every paragraph. And the way I'd split it would be into work experiences and volunteering activities. Not like split the personal statement, but these are kind of sections that you're thinking of. So like work experiences and volunteering activities, things that you do in terms of hobbies, in terms of what you read that's related to the medical field, things like newspapers or news articles or books that you've read, or things you've now listened to thanks to podcasts and YouTube videos out there and things like that. And it's just basically a culmination of everything that you can for the application itself. Rather than, I remember having friends who'd maybe just read a few books on like economics, for example, and obviously in economics you can't really get work experience anywhere. Maybe in a bank if you're lucky, maybe one, but that doesn't form the core of your personal statement. Whilst medicine is more about what you saw in those volunteering and work experience opportunities and expanding out from that in each paragraph.
Yeah, and I think just to add on to that, I think people fall into the trap of thinking that they need to have some amazing story where they've had to do surgery in the middle of a rainforest or something like that, and then that should have been, and that's why they want to do medicine. If anything, that's probably going to reduce your chances of getting an interview. They're really looking for people who have reasonable, like, you just need to be logical. You need to show the person who's reading the personal statement, the admissions tutor, that you've actually had a reasonable approach to thinking about medicine. Sometimes that might be talking about that, you might talk about why you were considering a different career path and what might have happened that changed your mind and you realized that wasn't right for you and medicine was the right one for you. Because the key thing you want to do is come across as genuine. If you come across as genuine, if you come across as someone who's really thought this out in a reasonable way and not coming up with a wacky story, like I was 5 years old and I had this surgery and from that day on I knew I wanted to be a neurosurgeon, which some people might think is going to be like the thing that makes them get an interview. Actually, no, it's all about just showing, even if it's not anything extraordinary, just showing that you've had a very reasonable, logical, like, I thought that I liked medicine. I wanted to explore it further, so I did work experience. Work experience showed me X, Y, Z. I did some reflection on that, and this is why I came to the conclusion of applying to medicine. That logical flow will probably be much, much, much more impressive than anything else you could say, because it shows that you're a thoughtful person who's actually considered everything. And that's what medical schools are looking for, because one of the key things they were looking for is making sure that you're not someone who's not thought things through properly, was just going to drop out later down the line. There's a big problem of that. A lot of people coming into the career and not realizing what it's really about. So that's something they're looking for from the start.
That's really, really powerful. I think I definitely have come across personal statements that have said that from the age of 5, I knew I was going to be a doctor. So I can understand that. So there's another aspect, of course, to applying, which is, again, not common to other courses, which is the kind of the entrance exams. And we have both the UKCAT and the BMAT. Abdurrahman, maybe you can kind of keep elaborating a little bit more about what those exams are and what are they trying to highlight.
Yeah, so the UCAT and BMAT, for those who don't know, they're aptitude tests. So they're sort of trying to work at different kind of, essentially kind of working out your level. Like, it's an intellectual sort of test, an aptitude test. You do them there are other kind of courses that require you to do them, namely Oxbridge. So Oxbridge will sometimes ask you to do ones for, I think, physics and some other ones. And so these are tests that essentially universities like to use to be able to figure out if you're academically there for the medical course, because it's a rigorous course, right? Medicine is not an easy course. So they want to make sure that you're academically sound. There are two, as you've mentioned. The vast majority of medical schools will use the UCAT. But there are key ones, universities, including UCL, the one that Tafsir and I go to, Oxbridge, Imperial, and I think one or two others that use BMAT. And they usually take place, so the UCAT takes place before you submit the application. The BMAT, although they've got 2 dates, usually takes place around the same time as the submission. And essentially, a lot of people stress about these. I get a lot of questions like a year before these tests take place. People asking me like, right, so the UCAT usually is done like at the end of summer, and the BMAT is September, October, November, depending on the date you choose. And a lot of people worry about it and stress about it now and think that they need to start revising now. And actually, the number one piece of advice I'd be like is forget the UCAT and the BMAT. You need to make sure your your predicted grades, so the end of year exams, are good enough so that you get good predicted grades. If you don't get predicted grades, you fall in at the first hurdle. You can't be thinking, don't run before you can walk, essentially. Make sure you get those key A-level predicted grades, and then you can focus on it. The vast majority of students who do the UCAT and BMAT usually do them a few weeks before they take place. The advice I would give is 1 or 2 months before, which is usually summertime, basically. Once you've finished your exams is the best time to start thinking about that. And the vast majority of people who do really well usually spend that sort of time. They don't spend 6 months, 7 months, 8 months. That's not something that I know anyone. I don't think I know anyone who's done that. So yeah.
And I just want to keep kind of continuing that question up, because what I've come across, and I've not obviously applied for medicine, but when I had friends around me and I saw some of the past papers, they looked very different. They were very, some of them were not even course specific. They had a lot of logic associated to them. So talk me through some of the key differences between an admission and aptitude test versus some of our A-level exams, and also your support is out there for us.
Yeah. So with regards to the UCAT is a computerized exam. You sit it. It's a very fast-paced exam, and like you say, it requires logic and reasoning. The questions aren't themselves necessarily very difficult. Most people, if you sit down with any question from the UCAT or BMAT, will be able to work it out if you give them enough time. It's not like a conventional exam where sometimes you might just, regardless, you could sit there for an hour and you still wouldn't know the answer. For example, the BMAT has a science section. It's actually based on GCSE level science, but the questions they ask are asked in a way, if anyone's done any sort of quantitative reasoning or verbal reasoning sort of exam in the past, or seen these sorts of questions, they're basically, like you say, they're trying to figure out, they're usually 2 or 3 step questions. So questions that require you to do 2 or 3 bits of thinking before you get to the conclusion, and not only to do that, but do that in a very, very short amount of time. So usually you only have 20 seconds, 30 seconds, sometimes less for each of these questions. The UCAT is very, very fast paced. The BMAT gives you a bit more time. And yeah, like in terms of resources, I mean, with Medmentor, we've obviously put a lot of time and effort into, because there's a lot of resources out there, and we've spent a lot of time trying to condense the amount of resources to the absolute best free resources that are out there. And so what we've done is we've created a sort of mini directory of hand-picked resources for both the UCAT and the BMAT exam, so that anyone who wants to go through them can go onto our site, can go to what we call the Super Hub, which is basically a lot of great resources for every step of the application, some of which we've spoken about, the personal statement and the interview. And they can go to the UCAT section or the BMAT section, and they can find those resources, and that can hopefully help them. And that includes question banks and guides and things like that, video tutorials, courses, all those sorts of things. Everything you basically need to be able to go through the UCAT or the BMAT.
Amazing. Tafsir, I'm going to come back to you as an interviewer as well. You've seen a lot of applicants. What are the key things that have made you kind of pick one? And can you tell us a little bit about that process as well? Because the interview process itself has many kind of steps and questions and all that.
Yeah, so just a disclaimer at the beginning of this. So UCL, the way they interview is quite traditional. They have a panel interview where there's 2 or 3 people on the panel and the applicant answering questions for about 20 minutes. The way we ask questions is more based on the personal statement, your experiences, what you are like as a person. Whilst other interviews in other med schools, majority do now MMI, so they're called multiple mini interviews. It's like you go to a station, they have a set question or kind of task, and they test your skills within a circuit. So now that is the majority of interviews for all the med schools now, apart from UCL and maybe 1 or 2 others. Whilst Oxbridge have theirs traditional, but it's very scientific based. So that's just a disclaimer for everyone in terms of that. well, the way we interview at UCL, I think, is very similar to, in terms of the qualities we look for, they're very similar to most other medical schools around the country, because we want, at the end of the day, the same doctors at the end of the 5-6 years. One of the key aspects, I think, is critical thinking, and that ability to be able to weigh up advantages and disadvantages of an argument, or look at a different opinion and see both sides and both perspectives to it, is really important. The reason why I say that is, first of all, as a medical student, I can be helping to run like a GP practice surgery, and a patient might come in and they might be a smoker, for example. Now, I can't just go and attack them and say, no, you shouldn't be a smoker, XYZ. I need to be able to understand why they're smoking, their factors behind that in their life, their lifestyle, their opinions about it, in order to deconstruct that and make an argument that that they'd be receptive to. Now, that translates as a medical student, but in an actual interview setting, we'd ask you things like, oh, have you read an article recently? And if you have, or tell me your thoughts about it. And then you'd make your key points for and against of whatever the treatment was, and also your opinions based on that. And I think those are the higher level of candidates that we are happy to bring in, because that shows not only academic ability in their logical thought processes and intellectual ability, but also shows the communication skill of being able to get those points across as well.
Can I just kind of follow up again with a kind of a term? It sounds like almost empathy, and how important is empathy within kind of medical students?
So I think I tried to stay away from the term empathy in the first place, but I think it's a very good point. I think empathy, what it means to me, is that you can see yourself in the other person's shoes, and hence why I use critical thinking as a way to reach that point, because I don't think you can automatically do so, let alone at the age of 17 or 18, but you can do your best to do so. But that is what we want to see, and the way we see empathy is not by just saying, oh, I did a work experience and I became empathetic because I talked to a patient. You need to show that in your answers with the patient's feelings and patient's perspectives. And I think flipping your question of like what makes a great candidate to what candidates actually did get rejected were those that more focused on just what the doctor did or the healthcare professional, and neglected what the patient felt like, or their interaction with them, or what their perspective was. And is interesting, I'm just feeling that's an insight for me now, looking back on it, but that was how we basically judged empathy in that scenario.
Yeah. It's really cool. I have to say, as a non-medical student, but I'm really understanding the sensitivity and almost the human connections which are required, which is aside from all the kind of the academic side of things, which is often what we associate with this degree. So talking about the degree itself, Abdurrahman, I'd like to come back to you and briefly ask you, because there are different structures which exist. The UK is quite unique in its quite shorter time period. Could you just kind of give me like a blow-by-blow of the way UCL does their degree?
Yeah, so at UCL, it's currently a 6-year course. So the vast majority of medical courses in the UK for all universities that are on undergraduate, so you don't already hold a degree from somewhere else, are usually 5-year courses. And then there are some universities like UCL that mandate, so they have a compulsory extra year where you do a sort of mini degree in the middle. And that's why the UCL degree is 6 years. So usually the medical course is 5 years, and then sometimes you have that extra year. Some universities make it compulsory, like UCL, Oxford, Cambridge. Some universities make it an option, like King's College and Barts. They have that. You can still do an extra year, so 6 years in total, but it's not necessary. So a lot of people might not. And yeah, so essentially it's a 6-year course. The first usually, so it really depends on the university, but I'll talk about UCL, which is a very traditional university in the way that it teaches medicine. And the first 2 years are very much science-based. They're called the preclinical years, so the years before you start clinics. And they're focused on trying to build, trying to help you essentially have a strong scientific foundation. Obviously, there is a clinical aspect to it. When you learn your anatomy, you learn it from a more clinical perspective, in the sense that you will learn, for example, you won't just learn the wrist bones and learn them off by heart. You will learn which ones are most likely to break in certain positions, that sort of thing. And so there is a clinical aspect to it, but the core, it is very, very sciencey. And the third year is an intercalated year, and that's where you do the mini degree that I was talking about. And it really depends on what you're interested in. So personally, I did neuroscience for my intercalated degree. Tafsir, you did global health, for as far as I'm aware. And there's lots of other excellent kind of things that you could do. Primary health, cardiovascular health. There's a lot of other things, and actually a lot of non-sciencey stuff. So policy, things like that. In Imperial, they have a management course, which is quite interesting, which is quite popular as well, etc. And the last few years, so the 4th, 5th, and 6th year, at UCL anyway, these are clinical years. So 4th year focuses on the core medical, basically the core of medicine. 5th year is focusing more on specialities, so obstetrics and gynecology. So that's for women and children and pregnancies and that sort of thing. Pediatrics, which is something I'm doing right now actually on my pediatrics placement, that sort of thing. And then the 6th year is sort of bringing it all together, doing a lot of, but I guess like doing a lot, maybe Tafsir can talk a bit more about it because he's in his 6th year, but it's really about bringing it all together. And then you've got your finals at the end of that, obviously, which is to confirm whether you're competent and good enough to be a doctor.
Amazing. Yeah, Tafsir, please go ahead.
No, a final year is what Abdul said. It does bring it all together, because 6 years is a very long degree process, I think. And by that final year, you don't obviously feel like you're ready to be a doctor, but you are probably at the peak stage of your knowledge and clinical acumen, and you're probably the brightest and most enthusiastic out of all of them as well. So it's very nice. And not forgetting, the reason why I got into medical school was, even though I had a look at the degree structure being 5 or 6 years, one of the best things was that we have an elective at the end of it that's normally 2 months long, and so you can go to any country in the world and you can help and you can shadow and see how medicine is there. And I think that's a real draw to medical schools in general, and that applies to all of them. And the other thing on top of that is obviously graduating at the end, and hopefully being able to be a doctor and sharing that moment with your family and friends after all that work that you had done for the last 6 years.
So it's worth saying that you're not even fully qualified after the 6 years. You still have to, you're what they call pre-registered. So you're sort of half, and you need to do a year of actual clinical hospital. You're still paid. It's your first job. So obviously a lot of responsibility, a lot of excitement, but you have to do that. And then once you do that in the UK, you're considered by the sort of medical official body, the GMC, and that's when you're fully registered. That's when you're basically fully, you're a doctor in every sense.
Yeah, just a quick question, because I want to get my terminology straight. So there are residential periods during your degree as well. When did those happen, and in which years? And you mentioned F1 and F2. Is that a part of the post-degree process?
Yeah. So I think the way the residential aspects are when you go to a hospital site that's off your campus and like far away, really. And all medical schools have this, because they normally have like 5, 6, 7 teaching hospitals, and they're quite far away from each other. And I think with that, it's very niche to that medical school and their vicinity. So I'd encourage anyone when they're applying to look at those university hospitals and see how they'd feel like maybe living a couple of months in the middle of nowhere in England. But like but that's the experience that we need to have, because outside of towns and cities, medicine is very different, and hence why we have that opportunity. And to move on to a final point, I think it's with F1 and F2 is those are the 2 foundation years that we have straight after our 5 or 6 year medical degree. So at the end of your medical degree, you are a doctor provisionally, and therefore you are able to go to work as a doctor in F1, Foundation Year 1, and that is paid for and it's a real job. So that's good. And then in F2, you have a lot more responsibility because F1 is almost like teaching you on the job, even though we've done kind of an internship for 3 to 6 years already before that. So it really sets you up in like different, I think it's a very stepwise process to where you become a fully fledged doctor, where you don't realize the responsibilities are actually incrementally increasing, and your knowledge is as well, and your skills. And then all of a sudden you're treating patients where you might be one of the 1 or 2 only doctors there. So yeah, by F1 and F2, you've then finished the training program completely, and you then can choose whichever post you want to go into. And I think we can move on to that if need be.
Amazing. There's just so much to know, and I'm starting to understand a lot more about this process. There's another kind of more personal question that I wanted to ask, and it connects back to what Abdulrahman said right at the start about, you as a human being, you as a person, and finding yourself after 6 years, not just 6 years as you just showed, being in this kind of place of responsibility, place of position and morality, and kind of continuing that sort of life. So a question to both of you on a personal front: how have you been? How have you survived, especially times when it's got tough, when the degree is just like overwhelming, or the content is too much, or you're just tired? How have you struggled, or how have you kind of overcome those struggles?
Well, I think for me, I'll talk about my personal experience, and that I talked about how at UCL the course is very much scientific at the start. You spend 3 years, and then after that you start clinics, which is when you're going into hospitals, you're seeing patients, you're applying a lot of the knowledge that you've learned in real life, you're seeing doctors treat patients. And for me, the difficulty was really those first 2-3 years I found quite difficult. Not just the amount of like knowledge and memorization you need to do at medical school, which is obviously quite a lot, but not seeing patients, I didn't realize until I started 4th year, was a big factor. And in all honesty, I was sort of rethinking my choices. I was thinking, was this the right choice for me? Fortunately, I started 4th year and I started seeing patients. I started to see medicine in action. And for me, it changed everything. I absolutely loved it. And I realized it's definitely something that I want to be doing. And I think that that's something that a lot of people who are doing these traditional based courses need to remember. And unfortunately, a lot of our university doesn't give us as many opportunities at the start of in terms of clinics, in terms of seeing patients at the start, but a lot of universities do that, and they have 1 or 2 days a week where right from the first year you're already going to GPs, you're already going to clinics, or you're learning these clinical skills, etc. And that's really good. But it's worth considering that, and that's something that I never did consider it when I was applying. And for me, it was really difficult because it makes it if you don't enjoy something, it makes things 10 times harder. Absolutely. Than when you do enjoy it. And so when you're now when you're revising, when you're studying, obviously it's still hard, it's still long, but it feels like there's a purpose behind it. And I think that's what was lacking in the first and 2 years. You're learning things, you're like, why am I learning Krebs cycle for like the 3rd time in my lifetime? And the Krebs cycle, by the way, it is like, I'm not sure if you remember, but it's like in biology A level, you learn it with the cell cycle and that sort of thing. And you're never going to use it unless you somehow specialize in a very, very niche in metabolic medicine down the line, which is a tiny, tiny speciality that you might do. It's really going to be quite irrelevant. So these sorts of things, you have to sort of fight with yourself, and you do have to do a lot of persuade each other, and motivate each other rather, to keep going. And yeah, alhamdulillah, like at this stage, we got to the stage where we got to clinics, and now I'm really enjoying it.
Amazing. Tafsir, same question for you.
Yeah, so kind of like the survival guide to medical school, right? I think that the issue when I first walked into medical school was that I was intimidated and overwhelmed, intimidated by incredible people around me, where I then felt imposter syndrome, which is a term that's been used quite a bit more in the last few years. And then linked to that, the overwhelmed with the amount of work that you need to do in med school.
Yeah.
Because for some reason, what was told to me was that university is really chill. It's all fun because everyone who comes back from university to give talks in schools, they're obviously only going to tell you the amazing things that are going on, not the long hours that you need to study and keep yourself motivated for. And it's those hours that really count. Those hours that it's just you by yourself and you're working hard that end up with you getting the degree or having those incredible moments. And I think what's key to that is trying not to burn out with medicine. Medicine is all consuming. I mean, this is the same for all subjects or topics or fields that are worthwhile going into. You need to work really, really hard at it. But at the same time, if that's your only focus, I think it can drive you crazy. I think you can burn out really early on. You can become disillusioned by it and become kind of unproductive in the amount of hours that you have for it. So from really early on, I'm sure with Abdul Rahman and myself, we got involved in loads of societies. We got involved in extracurricular events, organizations. I mean, now Medmentor has been created by Abdul, and so like these are things that we do as hobbies alongside medicine. And I think that's what makes our life easier, because all our whole like self-worth and validity and our energy isn't going to just one thing non-stop. It's being shared out. And what we actually see is to be an incredible doctor and clinician is what we want to become in the future, right? And the way around doing that is not by just being a pure scientist, is by having being an all-round kind of person and individual, because those are similar people to or like the same people you're trying to treat. So the fact that we're involved in organizations, or we're involved in open days, or we have a part-time job in a cafe talking to people, these are all skills that we're gaining in other walks of life that will ultimately help us with our career and our futures as well. So that's one thing to keep you motivated, and med school isn't all doom and gloom, I promise you.
I think it's a lot of people think that medical school, it will overwhelm you if you let it overwhelm you. If you want to spend 10-12 hours a day learning stuff, there's definitely enough content there for you to learn. I think really you've got to balance it between what you need to know to be a good, decent doctor in terms of being competent, which is an absolute priority. And then obviously if you want to go beyond that and you have an academic interest and you want to go into that world, a lot of people do, and they spend a lot of their time doing that. They go into the research, they study a bit harder than everyone else. That's an opportunity. But I think as Tafsir was talking and touching upon, it's not like we're all just sat there like at 1 or 2 a.m. studying all day, all night. That's not true. We do all have our own interests. Like Tafsir was saying, you've done so much with like your global health interests and other interests that you've had, and we've managed to put, like me and Tafsir and a lot of other medical student peers, we've managed to put together Medmentor, and we're running Medmentor, and we're doing that whilst we're all in medical school. Everyone on the team is a medical student who does Medmentor. So it is possible to do a lot of interesting things, and it's really about discipline. And obviously that's something that they do want to check that you have when you're going for your interview. They want to see if you're someone who can de-stress, if you know yourself, if you can time manage. And it will be clear that it's a very important skill to have. Otherwise you will go crazy, because that's what happens when you're stuck with just one thing. It's not really just medicine, it's with anything. If you just do one thing in your life, it's just gonna overwhelm you.
All consuming. Yeah, and it is an incredible, and like I'm sure students all over the world applaud you for putting together Medmentor during this time. It's very much real life experience for you guys, which you're sharing through your sessions, the resources you put together. So thank you on behalf of students who are using it. Is there anything specifically kind of, because you touch upon time management, and I think this might be my final question before we kind of wrap up, but and either of you can jump in, but there's this, it does feel like it's a huge subject. There's a lot of content. How do you manage your time? Are there any kind of specific skills or tools that you use to keep yourself kind of organized and keep the content in your brain?
I think to start off with, before Abdul jumps in, sorry. So I think it's really important to scope a subject and a topic and what you need to know and don't know, right? And one of the ways to do that is is to talk to people in years above you and make those networks and connections really early on. So when I was in first year, I spoke to second years who told me, you don't worry about this, you don't really need to know the specifics of how this mechanism works, you just need to know that comes up in exams, or you need to know this later on in like final and fifth year, like this is what makes you a good doctor by talking to the doctors on the ward, and this is what you need to make sure you've honed down on. So therefore you can prioritize in order of importance for exams and clinical acumen for when you're a doctor. I think that makes you choose kind of from all the waffle that's almost out there, and that streamlines your workload. So I think that's something that I definitely do. Abdurrahman?
Yeah, I'd agree. It's invaluable to be talking to the years above, to get that lowdown. Otherwise, everything can seem important, and you really need to know what is and isn't important, because otherwise you can go crazy with it. I won't lie to you, I don't think most medical students have like a special source that the rest of the world haven't figured out in terms of how we are able to do so many things. I don't think we're extraordinary in that sense. I think a lot of it is just, obviously some people have. I think a lot of it is about learning how you learn efficiently and figuring out how you revise best, and how you, and then this is very much an individual question and a personal question for each person, because the answer will be different for everyone, and how you learn best, and that's why things like active recall, and spaced repetition and question banks are really hot topics for medical students who love to talk about these things, because it's really about how can you learn the same amount of knowledge, and more importantly the key knowledge in basically a short amount of time, so that you can stay sane, and be able to do other interests, and these skills, Anki, which or depending on how you pronounce it and where you are from the world, Anki is a really popular one that a lot of medical students use, because at the end of the day, medicine is very much a memorization kind of course. You just need to memorize a lot of things. Obviously, then there's like the personal aspect of it, and how you communicate with people and how you handle and manage people. And it's not just about treating each person as a sort of, you need to treat each person as a person, and that's key. But in terms of like the key content that you need to know, you need to know at the end of the day what the medication is for X condition. There's a lot of memorizing involved, and that's not necessarily applicable in other courses where it might not be a lot. Like I know that you're very much a maths guy, so maybe for you it's much more about like rational, logical thinking, and approach and problem solving, whereas that's probably not so much a medical thing. Although medicine has its problem solving aspect to it. So yeah, all I'd say is when you get to medical school, the first year or two will actually just be figuring out how do you do things, essentially. And you shouldn't stress too much about getting that first SR or first in the year. It's very difficult to do that. What you should think about is how do you learn and revise best, because if you do that early on, and the earlier on you do it, the less stressful your life is, and the better your marks will be later on in your medical school career, which will actually have an impact in terms of your placement and your certificates and portfolio. Usually the first few years are not that key. So that's what I would say, is really trying to figure things out. And yeah, we don't have a special source or a special technique in how we do things. We're figuring things out like the rest of the world is. But I think yeah, discipline, obviously it helps and it means you can do more. But yeah.
Thank you so much. I think I'm overwhelmed with how many insights I've derived. I'm trying to summarize it, starting all the way from the start where you guys talked about reflection and empathy, going on to things like networking and building connections with your peers, having hobbies, keeping yourself sane by having other activities to do. There's like a wealth of information here. I'm really grateful for your time. Just to kind of mention again, really grateful that you have a platform available for students who are specifically considering studying medicine abroad, medicine in general. So it's been great to have you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And for anyone like thinking about applying to medicine, as you were saying, we're a free platform. A lot of people think that we're a paid platform because they hear a lot of other similar companies, but we're not. We're completely free. We've got resources. We've got a directory for lots of events that people are interested in. These are free events, and and we've got lots of blogs and guidance and Tafsir every week on a Saturday at 6 p.m. He does an open free session live. Anyone who wants to drop in, it's a Q&A session. They can just come on Instagram, on Facebook. We're across pretty much all the key platforms, and they can ask him a question about any part, and Tafsir will help out where possible. But yeah, thank you very much for inviting us.
Thank you for having us, Zubair. Thank you so much, guys.
Take care, guys. We'll talk later.
Bye.
Bye.